Hey guys, I wanted to post this video just to show how to remove the Perkins injection pump from the Perkins 404 series motors. This particular motor is in my JCB MIDI CX backhoe, and this backhoe, I purchased it. It had been sitting for quite a while. The works were kind of gummed up, and the only way I could get it started was to remove the pump far enough so that I could move the fuel shutoff lever, which was sticky as heck, over to the run position, and that's how I was able to get the tractor started and loaded. But it continues to give me problems. So what I want to do today is I'm going to remove the pump, break the pump down, give it a really thorough cleaning and inspection, and reassemble it and reinstall it. So again, this is the Perkins injector pump on the Perkins 404 series motors. They do have like a 3-cylinder version of this, and maybe they have larger ones, I'm not sure. But this is the block mounted pump that is actuated off the camshaft lobes. So this video is going to primarily focus on just how to remove and install the pump, and then I'll post a separate video showing how to disassemble, clean, inspect, and reassemble the pump. This is an important step before you remove the injector pump. If your machine, in this case my JCB backhoe, has an electric shutoff valve solenoid, one of these doohickeys right here, you need to remove this prior to pulling the pump up and out of the block. This just screws into a hole on the back of the block part that protrudes where the pump goes into. Okay, so just pull this out. This nut, this big nut, is a 24 millimeter. If you don't have a 24 millimeter, you can get by with a 1-inch, or you can even do what I did when I was in the field taking this out. I just used a adjustable wrench, and the short adjustable wrench actually worked out to my favor because it's kind of tight quarters to get in there. If you're working on a machine like this, it's kind of tight. You might be working on this on another machine, might not even have this, in which case you probably just have a plug, threaded plug in that hole, and it just relies on the manual shutdown lever. But if you do have this, you need to remove it before you pull that pump out. Once you crack it free, you can turn it with your fingers. It's kind of tough. You can get both hands in there and get enough fingertip on there to spin this thing loose. Of course, prior to that, you want to undo this plug, because otherwise you're going to be fighting the wiring trying to coil around itself, and you could damage the wiring harness. So you unplug it, crack it free, spin it off. So to remove the pump, you're going to need a 17 millimeter open end wrench. You're going to need a 12 millimeter socket. I'm using 1/4-inch drive just because it's easy to get in there. And also you're going to need a 10 millimeter wrench. I recommend a gear wrench style wrench. That's going to help make things go a little bit quicker. And if you have access to one, also this happens to be a 1/4-inch drive electric ratchet. So the 4 high pressure lines to the pump actually screw onto the pump with these nuts right here. And the problem that you're going to find with these is that they typically get stuck onto these other, they're not nuts, these actual parts right here, which are also designed to be able to unscrew. So what happens is when you go to turn these, this will want to turn. So if you put a wrench on here and keep this from turning, you can get this nut off. The problem is, because they're so close together, you can't get an open end wrench in here on these other ones. And I didn't want to take all of these internals apart on the motor. I want to do that on the bench. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did to take this out previously, which is I'm going to actually undo these high pressure lines at the injectors and remove the pump with the injector lines complete. You can actually just fit it out of here. It takes a little bit of finagling, but it can be done. These are the nuts that you have to remove. There's 2 here, and there's 1 up in that corner over there. These 3 nuts on the top are on studs, and then you have 3 bolts on the bottom. So you get a bolt here, and there was a bolt here. On mine, for some reason, this was a socket-headed cap screw, so I had to use an Allen wrench to take that one out. I'm not sure if that's original. I have a sneaking suspicion that somebody lost the bolt and then just stuck that in there. So that's why that's out already, because I knew I was going to be taking this out again. Anyways, okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to undo those injector lines at the injectors. So it seems like it's pretty tight quarters in there, but it's actually not too bad. It's just difficult for me to have the camera in there and have the camera not be in my way while I'm trying to actually do the work. So I just wanted to give you a shot of this is what the hard lines look like as they get to the tops of the injectors. So you're going to loosen these right here, and then once you've got them loose, you gently pull up on this and it'll pop out of the socket. The next thing I want to do is I want to remove this 10mm bolt in this banjo fitting right here. So there is the fuel line that comes in. It's a rubber fuel line and attaches to a fitting right here. Let me see if I can get this out of the way for you. So hopefully this will stay in focus. This is the 10mm bolt that I'm talking about right here on the top. So there is a rigid line right here to a banjo fitting. So by taking this bolt out, when we go to remove this pump, we will not be bending this line because this line's kind of in a fixed position. If you bend this line slightly, it'll make it harder to reinstall this bolt on reassembly. And this little guy is a 10mm, so you can get on it with a 10mm wrench and turn it a bazillion times, or if you're fortunate enough to have a gear wrench, you can do it a lot quicker. There is a little rubber washer there on this bolt. There is also a rubber washer between the banjo fitting that I just loosened and this next fitting. Now if I loosen this next fitting, as it raises up, it's going to have a tendency to want to push on this banjo fitting and bend it out of position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off on loosening that fitting, and I'm going to remove the 3 nuts on the studs on the top and the bolts on the bottom. This right now, some of these injectors are actually on lobes on the camshaft that are in a position where they're pushing up on it. So it's normal that when I loosen these bolts and the nuts, the whole pump assembly is going to want to spring upward. Again, these are 12mm. So this is that fitting I was talking about that I'm going to hold off on, and these are the 12mm nuts. This one kind of hides on the back here, and the other thing that's special about this one in the corner, which you can't see from the angle I've got the camera at right now, but this one has a little U-shaped flat piece of metal that actually is a mount for this rigid line right here that runs behind here. The good news is that once you get this nut off, that will rotate on the line up out of the way. It can be a little finicky, but it will eventually cooperate. Come on. You'll see when I loosen this last one, you might even see the pump move upward. See, as soon as I loosened that last one, you saw this whole pump kick upward this way. That's that spring tension I was talking about from the injectors, whichever injectors are still being pushed by the camshaft lobes currently. So now this flat piece on the side here, I don't know if that's in frame or not, but right here, that just flips up out of the way. Just want to make sure you remember to put that back in position when you're reinstalling the pump. But now, because I've got my banjo bolt out at the top here, this whole pump actually can pop upward a little bit. Get that banjo bolt, that banjo fitting disengages. Okay. Now again, remember there's a seal right in here. You want to make sure that stays put. We can pull up on this pump now just far enough, like that. Now I can take out this fitting, which holds this banjo fitting that has the fuel line attached to it. And that's going to be the same 17mm wrench size that we used for the injector nuts. So, guess maybe keeping it on these studs until you get it broken loose might not be a bad idea. Now that I've got it broken loose, now I'll pull it back again out of the way of this so that I can completely remove it. Now there is a copper washer here between this fitting and the banjo fitting, and then there's another one between the banjo fitting and the body of the pump. So I'm going to pull this up, and I'm going to be careful to make sure that this washer does not fall off, and especially you don't want to have it back there, because if it falls off it could fall into the engine. So if you turn it while holding the washer, it'll kind of unthread. It's a copper crush washer. Now that'll allow me to pull this whole fitting out, and I see my copper crush washer is still in position, and this little washer right here is still in position. That one's looking kind of gnarly, probably gonna have to replace that one. So now this fuel line is completely disconnected. All right, so now if we pull up gently on this, we'll expose this lever right here that my finger is touching. This lever goes over to the governor mechanism in here, and it is attached to the fuel shutdown. It is attached to that rail that goes back and forth. This is the end of it right here, sticking out this end. I can actually push this back in. If I push it back in, I can push this all the way in manually. If I push that in all the way manually, if I put this pump back together right now, the engine would start for me. That's the problem I'm having, though, is that I have to manually do this every time. It's not returning on its own because it's sticking. So the trick here is there is a clip that you have to remove to allow this lever to come off of that pin that sticks out of the side of that rod so that you can take the whole pump out. So what you got to do is you've got to remove that clip with needle nose pliers, and you've got to be very careful that you do not drop that clip, because if you drop that clip, it's almost for sure going to fall into the engine. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a shot of that for you or not while it's in the motor, and I have to do it from an angle where I can actually get to it, and the camera's right in the way, so I'm going to have to reposition the camera. So that little zigzag piece of metal you see right there, that's the lever I'm talking about. So now I have disconnected the lever from the pin. You can see the lever stays behind in the engine, right there. You want to try and avoid bending that up as much as possible. And now through some finagling, I will be able to work out. Now with the injection pump removed, I can show you exactly what that connection is I was talking about. So there's a rod right through here. This is the end of it. That has, it's a rack, it's got teeth on the back of it, and it engages the individual sleeves to control fuel, so it rotates them. This pin right here that sticks out is what that linkage on the governor attaches to. So what's actually happening inside the governor is when the throttle is increased, that will move the linkage and cause this to move in this direction. If the throttle is set at a certain position and the RPMs on the engine start to drop because, for instance, you're driving into a pile of dirt and there's more load and it needs more power, the governor will allow this to go further and increase fuel. Consequently, if you run into a situation where all of a sudden the load goes really light, instead of the engine over revving, the governor will pull back on this. The default setting for this, when the engine is off, is all the way over to here, which is the start position. So this is the full fuel position. The shutdown solenoid that screws into that left side is actually spring-loaded so that when it's not energized, it's pushing on this rod this way to the full stop position. And what happens is when you turn the key on to start the engine, when you turn the key on and you energize that shutoff solenoid, the plunger on the solenoid pulls in, and the spring that's in the governor mechanism will allow that lever to push this over this way to start the engine. So this doesn't feel too bad right now, but there's got to be, every once in a while it feels like it hangs. So my suspicion is that there is gunk in the teeth in the rack. I can already see that there's some sort of gummy debris collected in these little areas right here. You can see it. Here's that lever that I disconnected, and you'll notice that when I push back on the lever, it wants to actually come back this way. So I know that the spring inside this governor assembly is not broken and it's working correctly. If I push this back and it just stays back and I have to pull it forward to make it come back out, that would indicate that the spring inside here has either broken or come off its pin. But this seems to be working fine. This lever, in case you're wondering what it is, this is the manual shutdown. So you can see when I activate this lever, it's pulling that back to the stop position. So this is if you don't have a on some models they don't have the electric solenoid for shutdown, and they would just have a linkage attached to here, and you would pull this to shut the engine down. So now that I've got the pump all cleaned and reassembled, I just need to reinstall it. Reinstallation is going to be actually easier for me because I was able to remove the hard lines from this end, so it'll give me a lot more access. The hardest thing about reinstalling it really is just getting that lever that's inside there from the governor to get into position over this pin, and then insert the little retaining clip to keep it in place. So you got to kind of lower it down inside there far enough so that that lever can be pulled up to reach this, but not so far down that you don't have access to get the clip on. In other words, here's the lever we're dealing with right here. This can be pulled up to like a max of here and no further without running the risk of bending it. So what we got to do is kind of lower this in. Alright, sorry, camera tripod shifted. But anyways, you can see now I've got this in a position where I've still got plenty of clearance here where I can get this clip in and lower that whole thing in. So now, in the interest of full disclosure, when I took this pump out, the clip was missing. And I know, I'm almost 90% sure that I reinstalled the clip when I got done last time I was in here. So the lever was still on, it hadn't fallen off, but the clip missing kind of makes me think maybe it popped out and fell into the engine. I looked inside here and I can't see it anywhere, but it makes sense that it would just fall right down into the oil pan. I needed to do an oil change anyways, so I drained the oil, and much to my dismay, the oil flowing out at a good rate during draining was not enough to cause that clip to get flushed out if it is in fact in there. So what I'm doing is I have a cotter pin. This hole is very small, so this was the smallest cotter pin I had, and when I put the cotter pin in, the hole is actually so small that both legs of the cotter pin won't go in. So what I did was I cut one leg short, and now I'm just test fitting it and realizing now that I'm going to have way too much excess here when I go to bend these over. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this other leg short too. Alright, so I'm just making sure I bend this in a manner that will allow the clip to do its job without falling out, and at the same time not bind with the lever itself and cause a problem. That should do it. Well, so the camera went out of focus there, but you can now see I bent the clip around in a way so that it should stay on there without getting snagged on that lever as it moves back and forth. So next up I want to reinstall this line. So I can lower this down some more. And bring this up. I've got one copper washer on the this end of the banjo bolt. And now, careful not to drop this. The other copper washer in there. And again, the reason why I'm not fully seating the pump at this point is because I need that extra clearance to get underneath this banjo fitting here without bending it all up. So now I've got it seated, and rather than try and tighten it now because the pump's not mounted, now I can mount the pump. So if you recall, I was explaining how some of the cam lobes are at their high point on the injectors here, or at least one of them is. So that's why this doesn't want to go all the way in. But all I'm doing is pushing against the spring action inside the injector, which is perfectly normal. So I'm not going to harm anything by pushing this down. So what you have to do is you have to push this down while you get the nuts and the bolts started. The bolts are a little bit easier. Now this stud right here has this clamp for this rigid line right here that has to go over it before you put the nut on. You can tell this is the side that must have a lobe up because it's much harder to push down this side. Now that the pump is mounted, I can tighten down this banjo bolt, and I can reinstall the 10mm banjo bolts for this smaller banjo fitting. And of course the seal is still on there. Now ideally I would be replacing all of these crush washers and fittings, but because this is a JCB, virtually none of the ones that are on this thing was I able to find at the auto parts store. Especially the, I really wish I had been able to get a new crush washer for the oil drain plug. This uses one of those flat metal disc with a like a rubber component attached to it. I don't know if you guys know what style I'm talking about, but it's not a standard crush washer. And I would have just replaced it with a standard crush washer, but they don't have any standard crush washers that fit that diameter of that drain plug. And I do not have a JCB dealer local to me, which is unfortunate. Because I do have a feeling that I am going to have to cultivate a relationship with one real soon, because there's some things on here I wanted to fix that I'm sure are going to be JCB only. Although, you know what? I should check for a Perkins dealer near me, because this is a Perkins engine, and I think this 400 series engine is used in a lot of other different things. So interestingly enough, I did order a service manual for this backhoe, and when it gets to the part about the motor, there's virtually nothing in there, because they basically refer you to a service, they refer you to consult the service manual for the motor itself. It'll give you a lot of information. Okay, so there's a hole in the back side here of the block that the fuel shutdown solenoid threads into. So as I had previously explained, the fuel shutdown solenoid, the default state, it's spring loaded for this rod to be out and pushing that rack all the way that way. So by default, it's pushing that to the no fuel position, and then when you go to start the engine and you turn the key on, the solenoid gets energized, this gets pulled back out of the way, and then that rack is free to move to the run position because of the spring inside the governor moving that lever over. So right now, theoretically, that should be pushed over into the run position. So let me hook up the hard lines. So when I'm putting these rigid lines on, for alignment purposes, I'm threading on both ends of each line, but I'm going to leave the line, the end of the line at the injector cracked loose. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to help prime the engine. So if I keep these lines off and I were to crank the engine right now, and if everything's working normally, very high pressure fuel would start squirting out of these ports, and it can be dangerous. You never want to have your skin anywhere near those high pressure injector lines if there's a leak in them or anything like that. So don't want to run it with these off. I'd rather just put these lines on, keep them cracked at the cylinders, and watch for fuel flow there. Additionally, as I get each one lined up, because I still have all of these clamps here loose that lets me move them around quite a bit, I'm going to tighten them down here. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because if I just put them all on loose or snug them all down, then each one of these gets in the way of tightening the next one. So what I'm going to do is work left to right. I got this one on temporarily, but it's just loose. I could take that off. But I've got enough clearance to get in here and get this one. You can see this one's already getting in the way of tightening that one, so I'll just pop that one off temporarily. So now I'm going to turn the ignition key to the on position. What that'll do is that'll turn on the inline electric fuel pump, the lift pump, and that'll start pressurizing fuel in the system. You can hear the pump running. And tell from the sound change, building pressure. So there's a bleeder right here on top of the fuel filter. I opened that, quite a bit of air came out. Once fuel came out steadily, I closed that. Then I opened this bleeder right here on the pump, and same thing, fuel didn't come out right away. I waited until fuel started coming out and closed it up. Okay, still not getting any smoke. So I'm going to take those hard lines off. Okay, I cracked all 4 of the lines again, cranked it, and then I started to see fuel coming out of a couple of the lines. So I reconnected all the lines and we'll try for another start. missing or anything. Oh, I need a fan belt. Alright guys, so it looks like we get a runner. This ended up solving my problem. It was just, you know, old diesel had gummed up the system. Just disassembling it, cleaning it, putting it back together solved my problem. I lucked out. I even lucked out as far as all these fittings, reusing you know, the seals and the banjo bolt crush washers and that. Don't have any signs of leaks, so I'm pretty satisfied with everything. So I'm going to close out this video right here. I hope this helped you guys. I know when I was looking for videos, I saw some videos that showed the pump being disassembled, but I really wanted to show, I wanted to make a video that showed a little bit more detail, so I hope that is going to be helpful and not too long-winded, like I'm being right now, as a matter of fact. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, consider sharing this video. Take care.